The moment you are about to quit is not the end of the road. It is the exact address where every extraordinary life was built. The people you admire most, the ones who built something remarkable, who became something remarkable, they were all standing at that same address at some point, exhausted, doubting, convinced that stopping made more sense than continuing. And something happened in that moment that changed everything, not outside them, inside them. Today we are going to talk about exactly what that something is and how you build it so completely into the architecture of your mind that quitting stops being an option your brain seriously entertains. There is a particular kind of tired that has nothing to do with sleep. It is not the tiredness that a good night's rest fixes. It is not the physical exhaustion that a weekend of rest resolves. It is the tiredness that lives in the space between who you are right now and who you need to become to get where you are trying to go. It is the tiredness of distance, of looking up at how far there still is to travel and feeling, in that moment, a very reasonable and very dangerous thought begin to form. Maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I've been wrong about myself. Maybe the people who didn't believe in this in me, maybe they were right. That thought is not the truth. But in the moment it arrives, it wears the clothing of truth so convincingly that millions of people have listened to it and turned back, have put down the thing they were building, have quietly, privately, without announcement, decided that the distance was too great and the cost too high and the uncertainty too unbearable, and they have spent the rest of their lives wondering, I don't want that for you. And more importantly, some part of you that is still reading this, still here, still willing to have this conversation, that part doesn't want it either. So let's talk about what actually happens when your mind says quit. Not the surface version of this conversation, the real version. The version that goes into the neuroscience and the philosophy and the lived human experience of people who trained themselves through specific, learnable, repeatable practices to meet that moment differently than everyone else. There is a woman named Adais who ran her first marathon at 43. She was not athletic by history or by nature. She had never run more than a mile in her life before she decided, on a Tuesday morning for reasons she still can't entirely explain, that she was going to run 26 of them. The training was brutal, not in the way running magazines describe brutal, not the picturesque kind of hard, with golden light and a sense of triumph at the end of every session, the unglamorous kind, the kind where every run for the first 3 months felt like her body was staging a revolt, where the voice in her head, loud, articulate, and endlessly creative in its arguments for stopping, showed up at mile 2 of every training run without fail. At mile 14 of the actual marathon, something happened. Adais hit what runners call the wall, the physiological moment where the body's glycogen stores are depleted and the brain, in its honest and well-intentioned effort to protect the body from damage, begins flooding the system with signals that translate as one clear message: stop. She told me later that the voice at mile 14 was not a whisper. It was a full, reasoned, compassionate argument. It told her she had already proven something, that finishing wasn't as important as she had made it, that no one would think less of her for stopping. Most people hadn't even attempted what she had attempted, that her knees were hurting and her lungs were burning, and this was her body telling her something important. Every word of that argument was delivered in the voice of reason, and she kept running, not because she silenced the voice, not because she found a sudden reservoir of physical energy she hadn't had at mile 13, but because she had, over 8 months of training, built something in her mind that was more powerful than the voice. She had built the habit of continuing past the argument. She crossed the finish line at 4 hours and 11 minutes. And she said the most important thing she learned had nothing to do with running. It was that the mind's argument for quitting is almost always most convincing at the exact moment before the breakthrough. This is one of the most important truths about the human mind that almost nobody talks about directly. The resistance doesn't intensify randomly. It intensifies strategically, or at least it feels that way, because the brain is doing exactly what it evolved to do. The brain's primary directive, beneath all the complexity of thought and emotion and aspiration, is safety, preservation, the maintenance of the known over the unknown. And growth, real growth, the kind that changes you, is fundamentally an act of moving into the unknown. Every time you push towards something you have never been, the brain experiences it as a mild form of threat. The further you push, the louder the signals. And those signals are experienced not as neurological self-protection mechanisms, but as thoughts, as feelings, as the deeply convincing inner voice that says, "This is too hard, this is too much, this is not worth it, you are not enough for this." The voice is not your enemy. It is your brain doing its job. The problem is that the brain's job keeping you safe, keeping you in the known, is directly opposed to your purpose. And if you don't understand this, if you experience that voice as truth rather than as neurological weather, you will respond to it the way most people do. You will listen. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius understood this conflict between the mind's instinct for safety and the soul's demand for growth with a clarity that feels startling across 2,000 years. He wrote to himself, in his private journal, in the middle of his own battles with exhaustion and doubt, these words: "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." He was not writing about abstract philosophy. He was writing about the exact same voice Adais heard at mile 14, the voice that presents quitting as wisdom, the voice that dresses retreat in the language of self-care and reasonableness and knowing your limits. Marcus was telling himself, and through the strange miracle of his surviving journals, telling us that the voice is a weather pattern, not a verdict, that you have power over how you respond to it, and that the moment you realize this, truly realize it, not just intellectually but in the bones, everything changes. There is a concept in Japanese culture called kaizen. It translates roughly as continuous improvement, but the deeper meaning is something more specific and more powerful than that translation suggests. Kaizen is the philosophy of small, consistent, non-negotiable forward movement. Not dramatic leaps, not heroic bursts of effort that exhaust themselves quickly, but the steady, patient, relentless commitment to doing slightly more than yesterday, every day, without exception. The factory workers who developed the Kaizen methodology in post-war Japan were not building a motivational philosophy. They were solving a practical problem. They were working in environments of enormous constraint, limited resources, damaged infrastructure, enormous pressure to produce, and they needed a system that didn't depend on optimal conditions or peak motivation or the kind of inspired energy that comes and goes unpredictably. They needed something that worked on the bad days. And what they discovered, what has since been validated by decades of organizational psychology and performance research, is that the commitment to the small step is the most powerful weapon against the quitting impulse that exists. Because the quitting impulse is almost always triggered not by the step directly in front of you, but by the accumulated weight of all the steps you can see stretching out into the distance ahead. You are not overwhelmed by today's work. You are overwhelmed by the vision of all the days of work still to come. And Kaizen's answer to this is both simple and profound. You are only responsible for the next step, not the journey, not the destination, not the mountain of work that stands between where you are and where you are going, just the next step. A man named Franklin discovered this principle not in a business book, but in the worst year of his life. Franklin had built a small architecture firm over 11 years from nothing. 2 employees had become 20. A rented room had become a proper office with his name on the door. He had done the slow, hard, unglamorous work of building something real. And then, in the space of 4 months, 3 of his largest clients withdrew their contracts simultaneously. His business partner left, and the economy in his sector contracted in a way that nobody had predicted. Franklin sat in his office one evening, the one with his name on the door, and looked at the numbers. And then he did something he had not done since he was a child. He put his head on his desk and wept. The voice that came to him in that moment was not unkind. It was practical. It told him he had given 11 years, that no one could say he hadn't tried, that there was no shame in acknowledging when something was finished, that he was still young enough to start something safer, something more reliable, something that wouldn't ask this much of him. The voice made complete sense. Franklin sat with it for a long time, and then he asked himself a question that changed everything. Not, can I save this business? That question was too large, too heavy, too loaded with the weight of 11 years and an uncertain future. He asked himself, what is the one thing I can do tomorrow morning that moves this forward? Just tomorrow, just one thing. He made one phone call the next morning to a former client he had always maintained a good relationship with. Not to ask for business, just to reconnect, to have a real conversation. That phone call led, 6 weeks later, to a contract that kept the firm alive. Franklin did not save his business in that evening of weeping. He saved it by refusing to ask the impossible question and asking the possible one instead. One step, then another, then another. The business exists today with 34 employees and his name still on the door. The mind that never quits is not a mind that never wants to quit. This distinction is everything, and it is the one that most conversations about mental toughness get completely wrong. Mental toughness is not the absence of the quitting impulse. It is not the rare and enviable condition of never doubting, never wavering, never hearing the voice that says, "This is too much." People who present it that way, who make it seem as though the strongest minds simply don't experience the pull towards stopping, are either being dishonest or they have confused the performance of strength with the actual thing. Every strong mind experiences the quitting impulse. Every person who has ever built something difficult, sustained something demanding, committed to something long, has heard the voice repeatedly, loudly, convincingly. The difference is not whether they heard it. The difference is what they built that allowed them to hear it and continue anyway. And what they built is not complicated. It is not a secret reserved for exceptional people. It is a set of specific, trainable, repeatable mental disciplines that anyone with the willingness to practice them consistently can develop. There is a moment in every difficult journey where the romantic version of the story ends and the real version begins. The romantic version is the one we tell afterward, the clean narrative of struggle and perseverance and eventual triumph that sounds, in hindsight, almost inevitable. We leave out the Tuesday afternoon in the third month when we sat on the floor of our own ambition and genuinely could not see a single reason to get back up. We leave out the private negotiations we had with ourselves about what quitting would actually cost. We leave out the number of times we almost didn't make it, not because we weren't strong enough, but because we were human enough to feel everything that the journey asked us to feel. The real version includes all of that, and the real version is what we are. The first thing you do when your mind says quit is refuse to argue with the feeling. This sounds counterintuitive. Everything in us wants to fight the quitting impulse to meet it with counter-arguments, with motivational self-talk, with reminders of our goals and our values and how far we have come. And those things are not useless. But they are not the first response, because when the quitting impulse is at its strongest, it is also at its most persuasive, and trying to out-argue a feeling with logic is like trying to stop a river with your hands. The feeling doesn't need to be defeated. It needs to be witnessed. A woman named Nkechi was 3 years into building an online business that had not yet produced what she had sacrificed to build it. She had left a stable job. She had invested money she didn't have. She had given weekends and evenings, and the kind of focused attention that leaves other areas of life thinner than they should be. And on a Thursday evening in November, sitting in front of a laptop screen with numbers that still didn't make sense, the quitting impulse arrived with everything it had. She told me she made a decision in that moment that felt wrong, but turned out to be exactly right. She stopped fighting it. She opened a notebook and wrote down every single argument the quitting impulse was making, every reasonable, legitimate, well-sourced point. She let it speak completely onto the page, out of her head, where she could see it in its entirety rather than feel it as an overwhelming internal weather system. And then she looked at what she had written, and something unexpected happened. On the page, with some distance between herself and the feeling, the arguments didn't look the way they had felt. They looked like fear, wearing the costume of reason. They looked like a mind doing exactly what minds do when they are tired and uncertain, and standing in the gap between where they are and where they are trying to go. She closed the notebook. She made a cup of tea, and she went back to the laptop. Not because the arguments had been defeated, but because she had seen them clearly, and seeing them clearly had returned to her the one thing the quitting impulse always tries to take first: perspective. The practice of writing down the quitting argument fully, without censorship, is one of the most powerful tools available to anyone training their mind toward resilience. Not because writing resolves the problem, but because it moves the argument from the felt realm into the visible realm. And things we can see, we can examine. Things we can examine, we can choose our response to. And choice, the return of genuine choice in a moment that felt like it had no options, is exactly what the quitting impulse was designed to remove. The second thing you do is return to why, but not the way most people do it. Most conversations about not quitting tell you to remember your why, to reconnect with your purpose, your vision, your dream. And there is truth in this, but the version of it that actually works in the hardest moments is more specific and more visceral than a vision board or an affirmation or a motivational quote on your phone wallpaper. The why that holds you in the darkest moment is not abstract. It is not a concept. It is a person, a memory, a specific image so concrete and so emotionally loaded that it bypasses the argument entirely and reaches something deeper than reason. There was a man named Emeka who was in the 14th month of a recovery process that his doctors had told him would take at least 2 years. He had suffered a spinal injury in an accident that had taken his ability to walk and was slowly, painfully, incompletely giving it back. The physical therapy was brutal. There were mornings when the distance between where he was and where he needed to be felt so enormous that getting out of bed felt like an act of delusion rather than determination. On one of those mornings, the worst one, the one where he lay still for an hour before he could make himself move, he did not think about his goals. He did not visualize his recovery. He did not remind himself of his progress or his potential or his purpose in any abstract sense. He thought about his daughter. Specifically, he thought about a Saturday afternoon 2 years before the accident, when she was 7 years old, and she had asked him to chase her around the garden. And he had, and she had laughed the way only children laugh, completely, without reservation, with her whole body. And he had felt, in that moment, a happiness so simple and so total that it needed no explanation. He wanted to chase her again. That was the why. Not a concept, not a goal. A specific, sensory, emotionally irreducible memory of something he was not willing to lose permanently. He got out of bed. Every difficult morning after that, when the abstract reasons had worn thin and the motivational language had lost its charge, he went back to that Saturday afternoon, to the sound of her laugh, to the feeling of running. The why that saves you in the worst moment is not the why you write in your journal during a moment of inspiration. It is the one that lives in the body, the one that bypasses language and reaches directly into the part of you that is older and more fundamental than thought. Find that why. Hold it where you can reach it. And when the quitting impulse is at its loudest, don't recite your goals. Go back to that moment. The third thing you do is shrink the battlefield. When the mind says quit, it is almost never responding to the task directly in front of you. It is responding to the entire accumulated weight of everything the journey has asked and is still asking and will continue to ask. It is looking at the whole mountain and feeling the full impossibility of it in a single overwhelming wave. And the answer to an overwhelming wave is not to become a bigger swimmer. It is to stop swimming in the ocean and find the pool. Shrinking the battlefield means reducing the scope of your commitment to the smallest possible unit that still constitutes forward movement. Not forever, just for now, just for today, just for the next hour, the next action, the next breath, if that is what the moment requires. Epictetus taught something about this that sounds simple until you sit with it long enough to feel its full weight. He said that we suffer not from the events of our lives, but from our judgments about them. And one of the most destructive judgments we make in moments of difficulty is the judgment that everything must be resolved, must be carried, must be endured simultaneously. It does not. You are not required to solve the whole problem today. You are required to do the next thing, and then, only then, the thing after that. A writer named Sophia had been working on her first book for 3 years. She had 200 pages of a manuscript that she genuinely believed in and a quitting impulse that had been growing for 6 months, fed by rejection letters and self-doubt, and the perfectly reasonable question of whether anyone would ever read what she was sacrificing so much to write. On the day she almost deleted the entire manuscript, cursor hovering, decision genuinely in the balance, she made a different choice. She decided not to work on the book. She decided to write 1 paragraph, not a chapter, not a section. 1 paragraph, the next one, wherever the manuscript had stopped. Just 1 paragraph. She wrote it in 11 minutes. It was not the best paragraph in the book. It was not the worst. It was simply the next one. And the next day, she wrote another. And the day after that. 6 months later, the book was finished. It was published the following year. It found its readers. It was saved by one paragraph on a day when the whole thing felt impossible. Shrink the battlefield. When the mountain is too high to look at the next stone beneath your foot. Place your foot on it, and then look for the one after that. The mountain does not require you to see all of it. It only requires your next step. The fourth thing you do is find the person who went further on less. There is a practice in Stoic philosophy called negative visualization, the deliberate contemplation of difficulty and deprivation, not to create despair, but to create perspective and gratitude. Marcus Aurelius practiced it constantly. He would remind himself, in the pages of his meditations, of the people who had faced conditions incomparably harder than his own, and had not only survived, but produced something that changed the world. When your mind says quit, when the conditions of your journey feel unbearable, find the person who built something extraordinary under conditions that made yours look like comfort. Not to dismiss your difficulty, not to perform gratitude you don't feel, but to return to your mind the perspective that difficulty almost always takes first. Harriet Tubman escaped slavery and then went back 13 times to lead others out. Not once, 13 times. Returning voluntarily to the most dangerous place in her world, carrying people she had never met toward a freedom she had barely tasted herself. When she was exhausted, when she was hunted, when the risk was absolute and the safety was never guaranteed. She did not have the option of quitting that most of us are contemplating when we think we are in our hardest moment. This is not a comparison designed to make you feel small. It is a recalibration designed to return to you something the quitting impulse stole, the knowledge that you are more capable than the voice is telling you. That human beings, ordinary human beings, people with fear and doubt and exhaustion just like yours, have endured the unimaginable and continued. And you, with your difficulty, which is real and which deserves to be honored, you can continue too. Find the person who went further on less. Let their story sit in your chest. Let it remind you of the extraordinary resilience that is built into the human design, including yours. The fifth thing you do, and this is perhaps the most counterintuitive of all, is rest without guilt. The quitting impulse and the need for rest are not the same thing. And one of the most dangerous mistakes a person can make in training their mind toward resilience is confusing the two. There are moments when the mind says quit because you have been pushing without adequate recovery. When the tank is genuinely empty, not from weakness, but from the simple physiological reality that sustained effort requires sustained recovery. And in those moments, the most disciplined response is not to push through. It is to stop, deliberately, temporarily, with full intention to return. The difference between rest and quitting is intention and time frame. Quitting is a permanent decision made in a temporary emotional state. Rest is a temporary decision made in service of a permanent commitment. A man named David was a competitive swimmer who had trained for 4 years toward an Olympic qualifier. 6 weeks before the trial, his body broke down, not dramatically, not with injury, but with the quiet, comprehensive exhaustion of a system that had been asked to produce at its maximum for too long without adequate recovery. His coach told him to take 2 weeks completely off. David experienced those 2 weeks as the hardest of the entire 4 years, not because they were physically demanding, because rest felt like quitting, because stopping felt like losing ground. Because every morning he didn't train, the voice told him he was falling behind, losing edge, wasting the years he had invested. He rested anyway. Because his coach, who had watched this happen many times before, told him something that David didn't fully believe until he returned to the water. The rest is the training. He came back after 2 weeks and swam the best times of his career. The rest had not been a retreat from the commitment. It had been part of it, the necessary, non-negotiable, physiologically essential part that his training had been missing. When your mind says quit, ask yourself honestly whether what you need is to stop permanently or to stop temporarily, whether the voice is calling you to give up or calling you to recover. One of those responses is wisdom. The other is surrender. Learn to tell the difference. And when you genuinely need rest, take it fully, without guilt, without the self-punishment that turns necessary recovery into another source of suffering. Rest, and then come back. Always come back. The mind that never quits is not born, it is built. It is built in the small moments, the Tuesday afternoons, when nobody is watching, and the work is hard, and the results are still invisible, and the voice is loud and reasonable, and well-sourced in its argument for stopping. It is built by writing the quitting argument down and seeing it clearly, by returning to the why that lives in the body rather than the mind, by shrinking the battlefield to the next single step when the whole mountain is too heavy to look at, by finding the person who went further on less, and letting their story recalibrate what you believe you are capable of, by learning to rest without guilt, and always coming back. None of these practices is complicated. None of them requires a gift you don't have. All of them require the one thing that the quitting impulse is specifically designed to make you believe you have run out of: the willingness to try one more time. Next, we are going to be talking about something that I know is going to stop you mid-scroll the moment you see the title, because it speaks to something that almost every person listening to this has experienced, but very few have ever had named for them clearly and honestly. You do not want to miss it. Subscribe to the Stoic Path right now. Hit the button, turn on your notifications. Join the people who have decided that the examined life, the intentional life, the life lived with clarity and courage and philosophical depth, is the only life worth building.